Good morning and a very warm welcome to everybody joining us today from around the region, from Egypt to Dubai, for today's webinar, Gender in the Workplace and Crucial Conversations for Men, where we will explore what it takes for men to build a new narrative in the workplace with a focus on gender equity so that we can create a more inclusive workplace for all. On behalf of the American University of Cairo, Egypt Women on Boards Observatory, Ashridge Executive Education, and the 30% Club MENA, I'd like to thank you for joining us for this very crucial conversation. I would also like to thank our hosts for organizing today's webinar, the Egypt Women on Boards Observatory, who are also members of the 30% Club MENA. And today they've joined efforts with the Hult, Ashridge, Executive Education, and 30% Club MENA as part of their commitment to leading ongoing dialogue and collaboration with key ecosystem partners and stakeholders to drive and scale collective impact for gender equality and inclusion. The Egypt Women on Boards Observatory advocates for the presence of 30% women on boards in Egypt by 2030. And through their collaboration with numerous stakeholders offering unique value-added impact, bringing together government, business associations, research institutions, international organizations, and non-government organizations. This remarkable collaboration between the entities has resulted in a broad coverage of the major business sectors where women have presence on boards, as well as providing substantial information for research and building a database of expert women seeking board positions. Ashridge Executive Education, our partners today, are based in the UK. They are the Executive Education campus of Hult International Business School. Ashridge provides transformational learning and development experiences for leaders and businesses worldwide, underpinned by robust research. It also supports organizations as they work to establish gender balance and diversity across the workforce and to leverage the benefits that diversity brings. And the 30% Club is a global campaign led by chairs and CEOs taking action to increase gender diversity at board and senior management levels. The campaign continues to expand its international footprint with presence in multiple countries and regions around the world. Our global mission is to achieve at least 30% representation of all women on all boards and C-suites globally. We support gender diversity in its very broadest sense. Ethnicity, disability, socioeconomic background are all part of the journey. We believe that only those organizations that foster truly inclusive cultures that embrace women who look, act, and importantly, think differently, can reach their full potential to positively impact their people, their markets, and their communities. My name is Lordi Lahto, and I'm delighted to be co-moderating today's webinar. I'm currently the CEO of Companies Creating Change, C3, and a member of the 30% Club MENA Core Steering Committee, leading the Women on Boards initiative. I'm also an advisor to TARA, an organization powering connections between female university students and corporates via speed mentoring and access to role models. My corporate career spans over 2 decades of international business experience, working in many countries in senior corporate leadership roles focused on business growth strategy. Joining me in moderating today's session are 2 subject matter experts, Dr. Rada and Dr. Debbie. The bios of our esteemed speakers and panelists this morning are full of incredible accomplishments, and in the interest of time, I will not go through all of these. The goal of today is to listen, to learn, and leverage from their experience and their journeys. Dr. Ghada Hawaidi is the Associate Dean for Executive Education at the American University in Cairo School of Business. Dr. Ghada is the founder of Egypt Women on Boards Observatory. She has extensive experience in organizational change and strategic management in local, regional, and international organizations in the areas of higher education, human rights, management development, information technology, and export promotion. Dr. Ghada is also a certified board director and a certified corporate governance trainer for SMEs and women in business by the IFC. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Debbie Benton. Dr. Debbie is a professor of leadership and organizational development research fellow at the Ashridge Executive Education Hult International Business School. Dr. Debbie is an experienced leadership and organizational development consultant and researcher. She has a special interest in the strategic and systemic development of gender balance, strengthening women's leadership, and leveraging the benefits of diversity in organizations through inclusion. Her doctoral thesis explores the phenomena of women being socially silenced in everyday conversational life. She is passionate about working with forward-thinking organizations to achieve cultures of equity and belonging, where inclusive conversations and ways of working are the norm. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Ghada and Dr. Debbie. And now I would like to introduce our speakers. We are honored to have a panel of male experts of business leaders. Welcome Dr. Nick Waith, Chief Executive Officer at the Energy Institute. Dr. Nick has 22 years of experience in executive and managerial roles, and most recently, he was the Chief Development Officer of Alternative Energy at BP. Prior to this, he held senior roles as VP of Competitor Intelligence and as Head of North America Investor Relations. He's also a board member for Powerful Women. I'd like to welcome Hassan Farooq, CEO of Grant Thornton, UAE. Hisham is well known for leading high-profile advisory engagements for some of the largest international conglomerates and local groups, mainly across the financial, hospitality, real estate, construction, aviation, FMCG, SMEs, and family business sectors. He is recognized as one of the top 3 leaders in the accounting profession within the MENA region, making him a key member across Grant Thornton's presence in the Middle East. Hisham believes in and is an advocate of the importance of gender diversity, as well as developing and empowering female leaders, particularly in the Middle East. And I must say that he's one of the most humble leaders and mentors that I personally know. Welcome, Hisham. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Dr. Patrick Coffey, Deputy Head of Research, Global Investment Bank at a leading global bank. In his role, he's responsible for managing 18 sector teams, as well as having the joint responsibility for department culture, research product, platform, and clients. Prior to moving into research management, Patrick worked as an equity research analyst for 10 years in the leisure sector. In his early career, he was a business analyst for Manchester United Football Club and a strategy consultant. Patrick is dedicated to creating a diverse workforce and a culture of kindness and inclusion. He is the well-being representative for the Global Research Department. And now I'd like to hand over to Dr. Ghada for framing the context of today's discussion.
Thank you very much, Laudi, and welcome to all our participants. And I'm delighted to be among a very distinguished group of panelists and moderators. Just to frame what we're trying to do today, We know in our own organizations how more women are reaching decision-making positions. Should we assume that organizations will remain the same as they strive to gender equity? We're asking the question of how organizations will actually change. We're also thinking about, should we assume that the culture of the organization will change when we exchange one gender for another at the top? Are we only exchanging the person at the helm of the organization, or will this impact our daily experience in each of our organizations? Our striving goal as advocates of gender equality is to create inclusive organizations for everyone. So what does that actually mean for both men and women? Debbie and I have conducted research on women's issues, gender issues, and so on. And I think we have a language to describe the experience of women. I'm not sure we have the language to describe the experience of men in this transformational period. And that's what we're looking for now. So how can a gender-balanced organization be inclusive for everyone and where everyone belongs? How does this impact men who lose privilege? When we're talking about senior positions, we're talking about a limited number of positions. So by putting women in senior positions, men are going to be excluded. So when men are disenfranchised in this transformational process, what does this mean to them? How can we change that narrative? We don't have the answers to these questions, but we are raising them to explore with feminist men who have figured it out, like our speakers today. This is why we invited carefully selected 3 men who we think have figured it out, have created a narrative for themselves, are thinking about the same questions, to see how they did it and to see how it impacted sort of their daily experience. So this is my take on why we're here today, and I turn to Debbie to add her inputs. Debbie, you're muted.
Thank you, Garda, and hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today to have this really important conversation. We know that legislation officially gives women equal opportunity and rights in society, but we know from recent research that the dial is still not shifting fast enough. Progress is being made to appoint women in senior positions, but we're quite disappointed with the level of progress, not just in the Middle East, but across the board. So it's critical to have the right inclusive culture. We know that to address inclusion at organizational level, you have to have a systematic business-led approach and bold action on inclusion. And that means involving men. It can't all be done by women. And so we're really excited to hear from the 3 men on our panel today, how they've in their organizations, what they've achieved, and maybe some of the challenges they faced personally. So we want to really get to the thinking processes and the mindset that's required and how they've made their shifts. So without further ado, I'm going to hand back to Garda to start our questions.
Thank you, Debbie. So Nick, I'll start with you. Can you give us an idea about your thinking about gender equity, how you got there, your personal journey?
Yeah, Garda, well, thank you. And thank you to the American University of Cairo and Ashridge Hult for hosting this wonderful event, and of course the 30% Club. So I wouldn't claim to have got there, Garda. I think that would be rather arrogant. And I would say I'm relatively new actually to this journey. I think to me, the sort of watershed moment is the recognition that this is not about not being sexist. It's a bit like many of us around race sort of didn't really tune into our role of being anti-racist rather than just not being racist. And I think the same is true of gender. I think that realization that it's not just about doing the right thing, engaging, it's about proactively making a difference. And so for me, some of the big changes I would say happened over the last 5 years at my former career in BP. And I'll cite a couple of examples. I think I worked in a traditionally very male industry. Energy is still incredibly male at all levels, but particularly senior levels. And I think there is still a mindset that there is a limited talent pool of females in the mix. And I think it really isn't only until you begin to make some choices about how you show up as a male leader that you can begin to affect that. So, for example, a candidate slate for a job posting where you're given a list of all male candidates. I mean, that is something that you have to respond to and go look harder, go search. There must be females who have got this. Think about how the title is crafted. In an energy role, we often demand prior experience of working in energy. Is that actually required for the nature of the role? And changing the language, thinking more laterally, can make a big difference. Actively encouraging females to apply for roles. How many men have been on all male panels and not even realized it, or at least not until we're sitting on a stage surrounded by other men? And so actually actively saying, no, I'd love to have joined that panel, but it's all men, I'm not going to add to that. Equally, when looking for one's own opportunities, be it an executive role or a board role, I have actively turned down opportunities because I've looked at a board of a company and it's all male. And I think in 2021, if a company hasn't made some movement, it probably isn't the sort of place I want to work or be seen to be working. So I think some of those are the shifts I have made personally over the last few years. If I'm honest, Garda, I think I was late to recognizing some of these things. I suspect a lot of men would consider themselves, pro-female, supportive of females, but actually it's when you take these positive actions that I think you can begin to affect some change in the workplace.
Thank you very much, Nick. And it's actually the ability to articulate why you're doing things. I think this is also a huge contribution. So thank you very much for doing that. Hisham, I will now turn to you. And if you can give us an idea about your thinking about gender equity and your journey, your personal journey.
Thank you, Ghada, and thank you to everyone. I'm very happy to be back here. I mean, AUC was my educational home, so lovely to be back here with everyone. Honestly, my journey began quite some time back. I mean, I had the privilege to lead Grant Thornton in 2012. And when I looked at our organization, we're an accounting practice, so it's very male dominant. And yet actually all the education I learned, I'm originally a sociology major. And, you look at all societies historically, and most societies actually prospered under feminine rule. If you look at matriarchal societies today, you find that their culture, their empathy, the level of even like theft and security is far better than many other societies. So that triggered for me an idea to say that, not only do we need to kind of change our own profession and have it much more inclusive, but actually that there is good, which has been proven by time and community, in having a much more inclusive group of professionals working together. So we started our journey back then. I remember we may have had 2, 3, maybe 5% of our population were women, and usually they were more in the administrative role. So the first thing we did was we started looking at our policies, and we started looking at the reasoning, and of course, the number of reasons were, number one, this is very similar to what Nick was saying, the opportunities given for, let's say, like sponsoring their education, for their professional education. Was more given to men, given this male dominant profession. 2, obviously, once they came into the professional line, naturally, if they want to build a family or so on, they get kind of delayed. These are all situations we know, but we said, how do we build and change our policies very early on for that? And that helped in the beginning. It brought in more and more women. But we also then realized that, you know, there's an unconscious bias that's in place as well. And so we started actually training our people against that unconscious bias, from points like, you know, in interviews, and how to communicate, to points on, you know, just having an understanding of what it means to be, for example, a mother, and the challenges that a mother would have. And yes, we may say that, you know, that alone is biased to say that a mother has different challenges than a father. But, you know, a mother that has a young nursing child has different requirements. So I think we need to change the narrative and how do we speak internally to our people and our team. And it was a long journey. I mean, we've been at this, and again, very similar to what Nick said, this journey I don't think will ever end. But I am proud to say now we're about 40% women, 25% in leadership. And when we do our annual surveys, I mean, what we realize is that the women now are speaking up. They want more women. And they want more women so that they can be heard and feel kind of they have that stronger presence. And I think once we get to that equilibrium, things will change. And yes, I'm a firm believer that if you look at our firm today, you know, honestly, it's a lot more enjoyable. You know, people are a lot more lighthearted. You know, that sense of sense of, you know, we are professionals, but we don't have to carry that professional badge, you know, from 9 to 5. We can be human beings as well. And I think that bringing back that humanity with inclusiveness was really core to what we did and why we're doing it.
Thank you very, very much, Hisham. And I think there's the importance of your own interdisciplinary education in the beginning allowed you to see things differently as well. That's a very important point. So sponsoring professional development and accommodating the mid-career leaking pipe, this is incredibly important. So thank you very much for this. Patrick, now I turn to you. Your thinking about gender equity and your personal journey, please.
Yeah, sure. And thanks again, everyone, for being here. I think it's a very important event. So I guess, first of all, echoing the words of the others on this call, Nick and Hisham, I think that for me, it's been a very much an evolving journey. And I certainly don't think I'm anywhere near the end of that. I don't think I ever will be. And it's really that journey has effectively followed my maturity in the workplace. Then I moved into my current role, which is a managerial role. And I suppose all of the learnings that I had seen before were slowly evolving in my relatively small brain. And I was trying to think about how we could create a better culture in our department. And I think that culture is completely key. Understanding the benefits of diversity across all levels, whether it's gender, you know, race, sexuality, other, is so important. But trying to get the culture right and at least attempt to improve it, frankly, can save a company a lot of money, because you can reduce churn, you can improve employee satisfaction and ultimately their well-being, and therefore productivity. So I moved into the managerial role, and I can talk a bit about it later on, I'm sure, when we talk about promotions, when we talk about interview panels, when we talk about everything else. But alongside all of that, I think I was reading and watching things, whether it was the Billie Jean King documentary on Battle of the Sexes, which I thought was great, whether it was a documentary about Serena Williams, who I think is probably the most underappreciated global sports star, probably because of her sex and the way she's perceived, or whether it's Invisible Woman recently, or Ngoze's Feminist Manifesto and 15 Suggestions. These books and these things I was watching were helping me on that journey. So I'll be quiet there. I guess my kind of key point would be that what I've learned on that journey is being conscious of the workplace you're in, being conscious of the practices and processes that go into building that workplace, and being open-minded to change. And quite frankly, being open-minded to radical change is probably the best thing you can be.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And what's coming across very clearly to me as you're speaking is that you're someone who's recognized that the value of fairness is important to you and you're trying to live by it. So it's actually being in touch with our core values and trying to live by that in our workplace. So that's wonderful. Thank you very, very much. And thank you to the three speakers in this first round of questions. And I now turn to Debbie for the second round of questions.
Okay, so what would be really important for us now is if you would share some of the conversations that you've had that have helped you to create your shifts in mindset. I mean, we've heard some things from Patrick about, you know, how we can watch films, read important books, which all obviously help to shift our mindset. But what are the key conversations you've had, maybe with some colleagues or other people, that have helped you to shift your mindset? So let's start with Hisham this time.
All right, thank you, Debbie. Actually, one of the very interesting projects we did, and again, Grant Thornton Global is, you know, diversity and inclusion is very high on its agenda. So we had a senior leadership program, and I remember they brought us all in. This was a couple of years back, and again, you know, the group of us, it was both men and women, but they brought in a psychologist that actually their intention was to show vulnerability, and it was very interesting to see because a lot of the men in the room had you know, difficulty showing the vulnerability for reasons that they were conditioned to show, you know their sense of responsibility and presence, professionalism, you know, on stage. And women also equally had you know, difficulty showing vulnerability, because I felt they were conditioned that they needed to prove that they even had, you know, thicker skin to be able to be in there. And after we finished, and after a lot of tissue paper and tears, it was fascinating how the communication completely changed at dinner that night, because we just realized we're all vulnerable, and we all have weaknesses. And I think that was, for me, just an amazing breakthrough on how I think teams can come together and use that as a unified approach, again, tapping into our humanity more than just looking at it from a gender perspective.
Yes, thank you. And from what you said earlier about when there are more women in the group, in the team, I think that men are able to be more vulnerable with each other. And that goes a long way to reducing bias. It's about getting to know each other on a human level. And, you know, it's an important part of the journey. Thank you. Okay, Nick, we'll go to you next.
I'll cite a few examples. I mean, I think the first experience I would share is that sometimes this conversation can feel a bit scary as a man. Certainly for me, yeah. On the outside of this conversation some time ago, it felt like a scary place to come into. And my experience, I'm glad to say, is that it isn't scary. It's not anti-men. I joined the board of Powerful Women about 6 months ago, and that group, that board, has deliberately set itself up to be broadly female, male. There's a slight balance towards female, but that group has deliberately embraced males into the conversation. Clearly, males are the problem. If we think about, there's nobody else we can really point the finger at on this, and therefore males need to be certainly a reasonable part, if not a big part, of the solution. So I think just the realization that this whole conversation is not anti-men. It's nice to see some men on the call today. Thank you for joining. It would be great if we had more men coming to conversations like this to understand their role. I think, Garda, you used the term loss of privilege as well at the start. And I guess to some men, maybe to many men, it may feel like that. I think that's a conversation where you need to flip it around. You know, the companies, the organizations that are going to be successful in the future are going to be the ones that have organizations, leadership teams, boards that are made up of a true representation of society, and therefore it drives competitive advantage. I heard the CEO of a very large UK energy company actually hoping other companies didn't embrace this agenda in the way that his company had, because he genuinely believed it gave him competitive advantage. Now, he didn't really mean that. Clearly, we want all companies to embrace that, but there is a point of competitive advantage. And I think once men realize that and play into that, you know, I don't think it's a loss of privilege, it's a gain of opportunity. And then I think, I mean, the last conversations which have affected me are the hard conversations when, you know, I have been the man making excuses as to why there aren't any females in the candidate slate, or why we haven't got a female interview in a recruitment process. And when somebody in HR has said, Nick, you need to try harder. Those are the conversations where you step back, think, okay, yep, you're right, I need to do something differently here. And I think as well as having those conversations with people, we need to be ready to receive those conversations as we go through our day-to-day lives.
Thank you, Nick. And yes, I think the sense that men feel that they are part of the problem is one of the things that's stopping men from becoming engaged in this conversation a lot of the time. And we've got to find some ways to get over that, and, you know, help them to see that without them, we can't do it. So we've got to work together to be part of the solution, to be the solution. Thank you. Patrick, how about you? What kind of conversations have helped you to have a change in mindset, shift your thinking?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, and I'm afraid I don't have a great answer for this, because there were no specific conversations. There were no light bulb moments for me, and I think it goes back to the first question that Garda asked around my understanding of it all. I think it's an evolving kind of maturity, frankly, on my behalf. So I can't point to one specific thing. What I can say is that it's all about observing behavior and listening in the workplace. So behavioral things that one can observe, and I suspect almost everyone on this call will have seen some of these things, but microaggressions in terms of words that can be used to describe females that wouldn't be used to describe men. And Debbie, you're the expert in this area, but you know there were countless number of those that I observe on a I used to observe a lot, and we've tried our very best to cut that out in our department pretty aggressively. Whether it's interrupting women, and I think that that's something that has actually been a real challenge during the pandemic, particularly on Zoom calls like this. There's a propensity, I think, for men, when you start thinking about these things a bit more and become a bit more conscious of them, you can observe them a lot more. Your job as a leader, I think, or your job, frankly, as anyone in the department, is to call it out. And then another thing, and I won't list out all the examples, but another thing is, you go into a meeting for half an hour and the first 10 minutes is talking about the Spurs versus Arsenal results, or the Man United, whatever. And quite frankly, this isn't to suggest that women don't like football, but quite frankly, quite a lot of people in that room don't really care about Spurs or Arsenal. So you've got to cut that out, because you can create an all boys club quite quickly, I think. So those are just 3 examples, but then, you can talk about how women can get referred to as girls and men get referred to as men. And again, it's trying to change that behavior and challenging yourself. So other conversations for me, conversations with my wife, who was very successful at work. She's now full-time mother, but she's always my sounding board, and will help me out a lot. I listen to and debate a lot with an expert in the area of gender equality in the workplace. Not in a formal way, but during dinner time conversations and other situations, social situations, and I learn a huge amount from her. I have a female career coach who's helped me a huge amount as well. So all of those things, and then the final thing I'd say is about, again, on the listening piece, but it's around feedback on what has gone well. So whether that's clarity around pay, and I can talk about that in a moment, promotional clarity for all, men and women. And thinking about work-life balance, particularly post-pandemic, is critical. So learning and listening to people on those sorts of topics, but I guess we'll touch on them next. Anyway, that's probably all for me on that. I'm probably gone over my 2 minutes again, so apologies.
Thank you, Patrick. There's some great insights there. And just going back to your point about microaggressions and inclusive conversation in the workplace, and particularly virtually, we're really working hard with leaders at the moment to develop the skills to make those interventions when they notice microaggressions or bias. And interestingly, the whole experience is full of challenges for people. So again, that's an area that we've really got to work on. We're just going to have a quick poll now with our audience and ask you, what have you had conversations about gender in your workplace? So if we could have the poll put up, thank you. Could put your answers in there. We can see who's had conversations, and everyone so far is saying yes. We've got 4 responses so far. Any more? Okay, we'll leave it at that. So far, 4 people have had conversations about gender in the workplace. So I don't, because there's only 4 responses, I don't know if that means the rest of you haven't. But that's interesting. Apparently someone says the poll has got an error. Not to worry. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Lordy, who is going to explore our 3rd question.
Thank you, Debbie. So I'd now like to address the question to our panelists and ask them to share their personal or main organizational achievements with respect to gender equity, and at the same time, what advice would you give to other men embarking on this journey? And I will start with Hisham.
All right, thank you, Lottie. I appreciate it. Look, I think that the main thing is, and I know my colleagues have touched on many points. The conversation has to stay open. I think that's the most important thing, and the conversation will evolve. You know, I think coming into a room and saying this is, you know, these are the policies we're going to change, and that's about it. Everyone will always learn something new as this kind of, you know, professional community comes together. So I think that's one of the main things, and I think the other thing is you know, something that Dr. Heda alluded to earlier was you know, while some men may see this as taking away their opportunities, as we see. You know, many regulated entities stating that there has to be a minimum number, for example, of women on the board, and so some men may see this as a deprivation of their rights. I think that conversation between the men that work together has to happen as well, and an understanding and debate and an openness on letting go of why they're holding on to this, and you know, and ensuring as well that there is, for example, then a process of cycles. You know, so maybe you have shorter cycles that allows more people to come in. So that's where I think the dialogue must stay open, and people need to be ready to be able to have these discussions. But I guess progression will naturally happen, and it should be embraced, you know, in a good way.
Thank you, Hisham. And Nick, what are your thoughts, and what would you like to share with us?
So a few thoughts. I mean, firstly, in my own organisation, the Energy Institute, I've only been there for 6 months, so I've had the benefit of inheriting a very balanced organisation. In fact, a majority of females at all levels, including the leadership team, which is a fantastic place to be, and something I will do everything I can to maintain and to continue to build upon. If I think about more broadly the energy industry and my role at Powerful Women, I mean, today, nearly 30% of the top UK energy companies, the top 80, do not have a single female on their boards. I mean, that's a staggering statistic. How can that be in 2021? That 30% of those companies don't have a single female. The numbers that executive management are not anything to show off about either. So I think we need to change the mindset. You know, organizations like the 30% Club, I really think you need to rebrand as the 50% Club, because until we get to 50%, we're not delivering what we need to in terms of representing society. And I think this is absolutely critical. At the moment, on the back of COP26, net zero energy transition is front page news everywhere. And the reality is I don't think that transition can be delivered without an industry that represents society in every form of diversity. Energy companies need to represent and understand the customers whom they're serving. And I think that's absolutely critical. I think the other thing I'd like to touch on briefly is the role of men in childcare. And Hisham, you talked about this a minute ago about, you know, how, and I've heard this many times, we need to do more to support working mothers. And absolutely, we do need to do a lot more to support working mothers. I also believe passionately we need to do more to support working fathers and to make this less of a gender sort of perceived role. And I think, as in terms of the benefits, there are very few organizations that offer sort of equal paternity, maternity rights. I think there's a mindset shift we need to have as society and as business and as organizations that doesn't see females as the primary caregivers. It needs to be balanced. It needs to, encourage men. In my previous role at BP, I set up a working parent and carers group, which I chaired. And interestingly, that group had as many engaged men as part of it, trying to make a difference as we had engaged working mothers. So I think there's a really important role we have to sort of, let each couple decide what suits their family circumstances and really try and take the gender out of primary caregiving. I think that's really important.
Thank you very much for those insights. And Patrick, we'd like to hear from you. What sort of accomplishments or main achievements that you have been able to deliver, and please some advice to other men in the room today that are embarking on this journey.
It's an incredibly important point. And I think, anyone in the department should be aware of shared paternity leave. And if you don't know about that, you should promote it, certainly. And I think that's just very, very important. So I've listed down a bunch of things here. I'm going to rattle through them and I won't give a huge amount of detail on them, but just a few things in terms of achievements. And it's not to say we've got everything right. A lot of it's experimental and a lot of it is taking a risk. And sometimes you get things drastically wrong. So recruitment, I think it's really, really important. We use headhunters and we do internal recruitment. Headhunters can very often bring you 5 fantastic and incredible candidates, and they're all men, and very often they're all white men. Again, you have to challenge them and accept that things will take longer. You've got to challenge them. Setting up a promotions committee with an equality on that of at least 50% male, female is something that we've done. Having ex officios onto global committees is also very, very important. I'll just whiz through a few more things, but creating working groups, so diversity committees is something we've done relatively recently. Importantly, management shouldn't be involved in those committee conversations. They should step out and let the committee talk about it and come and present to them with ideas for change. We talked a bit about childcare, work-life balance, and considering changing things like start times, or from a leadership perspective, talking about your own childcare challenges and your own start times and how you've changed post-pandemic. Be aware of the networks in your business, whether it's a women's network, whether it's a diversity network, whether it's the female lead network that's been set up. Be aware of those networks within a wider organization and talk to people about it and promote those networks. A few other things, just briefly, when presenting to departments or externally, think about who it is presenting. Why not challenge that kind of the 2 men that stand up there and have some diversity on internal and external presentations. And then finally, in terms of other things, promoting, reading lists or films that I referenced earlier to the department. It doesn't cost a lot to buy a bunch of books and hand them out to everyone, like Invisible Women, which is something we did last year. So that's about it in terms of ideas, but I guess you asked about, that's about it. I've gone over time again, sorry.
No, thank you very much for sharing those examples. I'm sure relevant to everybody. And it's interesting how we've all touched, or you've all touched on similar themes, particularly around the conversation having to stay open, as Hisham has said, and you've all said similar points, and the conversation will evolve. So thank you. I'll hand over to Ghada.
Thank you, Laudi. I think we have another poll now about the webinar, and apologies if the first poll didn't work properly. Maybe I think we have time to do the two polls together. So can we repeat the first poll again, please? Aya? Okay, this is the second poll now we're doing.
I will do the first poll again, but just
After.
give me 1 minute.
Okay. Okay, so we're doing this one now, and we're getting people to participate. Okay. Good. We'll leave it on for a little more time. Okay.
Good.
So we'll leave it on for another 5-6 seconds. Okay, so we've ended the first poll, Aya. You will show us the results
I
now,
have
please.
to repeat it again. So, okay.
Which one are you repeating? The one about how the webinar helped? Okay.
No, I will repeat the first one, the first poll.
Okay, just a second.
After this one.
Thank you. So we have about 92% of participants saying that they think that the webinar helped their thinking about gender in the workplace. So thank you for that, and we apologize to the two that didn't benefit, and we hope to hear from you your concerns and how we can make it better and more relevant for you. Thank you, Aya. So we'll go back to the first poll now.
And if anyone's got any questions, please write them in the chat and we can address them.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, so this is the first poll again. We're repeating it for those who were not able to respond the first time. Okay, so we're getting about almost 80% of participants have had actually conversations about gender in the workplace. That's quite significant. So I think now everyone has had a chance to respond to this poll. Thank you. Thank you, Aya. Okay. So we will close this now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Aya. So just to conclude and to wrap, for me, this has been a very, very exciting conversation, and I really want to thank our speakers. This webinar is recorded, and we will share it with everyone who participated. And I encourage you to share it with your colleagues who may be interested to learn from it. I will definitely do that in my networks, because I think there were very important insights, and we need to encourage men to join the conversation. So the things that stood out for me, I've been taking a lot of notes as Patrick and Nick and Hisham were talking, but not enough to be not sexist or racist, but you have to be actively anti-sexist and racist. That really stood out for me. Sponsoring the professional development of women and accommodating mid-career leaking pipes and having activities to show vulnerability, being aware of microaggressions and hiring practices and living by your values. I mean, these are all very, very important things to be able to articulate and bring out. So Debbie and I are working on some research in this area. And together with the 30% Club MENA, we will be organizing a workshop on the 1st of February around creating gender equality allies and partners. So this is a heads up for the workshop. We hope that you will all be able to participate, and we hope that we will be able to engage with you and other colleagues who would like to be part of this conversation. I see a comment I'm looking for the questions in the
question. There's a question.
Yes, from Riham.
Yeah.
Yes, I would like to ask why men think that once there is equality in the workplace to hire women, this means our opportunities are taken from them. I think I mentioned that a little bit when in my opening points, not about the hiring of women generally in the organization, but about the positions on the top. So if we're talking about a board that only has 9 members and these 9 members are currently men, in order to put a woman on the board, one of the men will lose his position. You can only have one CEO in a company. So if currently you have a majority of male CEOs, to have a woman CEO, that CEO will lose privilege. That's the point that I was making from the personal perspective of the men. But I'd like to hear if Nick, Patrick, and Hisham, you have any responses to this question.
Well, I'll have a go if I may, Garda. I mean, I think there's a perception this is a zero-sum game. And you know, if you look at one company in isolation, then arguably it is. But if you think about the potential of planet Earth and having 50% of the population fully engaged in every aspect of the workforce, that has got to make a bigger whole for everybody to play in. And I genuinely believe, as I mentioned before, the companies, the organizations that do have the right level of diversity across all dimensions are going to grow, they're going to become bigger, it creates more opportunity. And so, I genuinely believe the men that lean into this will find competitive advantage for their organizations and frankly for themselves personally. And I think we've got to break away from this being felt like a zero-sum game. It really isn't. So I get why people make that point at a sort of micro level. At a macro level, I think we need to have a different mindset.
Thank you, Nick.
I doubt I can be as eloquent as Nick, but the only thing I'd add is I think being aware of all of the academic data around the benefits of diversity. So instead of thinking about it in terms of me versus them, think about it in terms of improving the workplace and improving, society as a whole, quite frankly. And, therefore, if you think about the data and you use the data, you will want to create and promote a diverse workforce. And that will at times mean that men don't get jobs, but that's the right thing for the workplace. And that's the right thing for creating a really inclusive, good culture.
Exactly.
And there were huge benefits to companies when that's put in place. So I think being aware of the data is really important. And I think one of the panelists referenced that earlier, thinking about the data around each cohort, male, female, and think about diversity. So one can talk about this stuff endlessly, but if you don't look at the data and challenge the data and try and improve it, you're not going to make a lot of progress.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hisham, any final comments? We're out of time, but I'll give you 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. No, the quickest thing is just that this is a message actually to all the men is actually observe how you are around women in the workplace and when you're not. And I think that alone will tell you what needs to change. But thank you, doctor. Thank you very much.
Very, very, very succinct and very, very, I have to say, eloquent and important. So there was a question about when the recording will be ready. Early next week, it will be sent to all participants, and we will be sharing it on our social media, both AUC, Hult, and 30% Club MENA. So yeah, early next week, I think everyone should get it. So I want to thank very, very much our speakers, Patrick, Coffey, Hassan Farooq, Nikwaith. I want to thank Laudi and Debbie for working with us on this. And I want to thank all the AUC team behind the scene who made this happen. Sally, Shireen, Aya, thank you all for organizing this. Thank you all also to all our audience. And we hope to see you in the workshop on the 1st of February and to encourage your male colleagues to join. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.